Right. Thank you, everybody, for joining me. My name is Ivor Blumenthal, and I have been asked to essentially do what we've done for a number of companies and also in a number of groups. And that's basically COVID 101 for businesses to actually take you through a variety of discussions. One being on the fact that you currently now are operating within the level four, but I want to talk about that because, in fact, when we talk about level four, we're talking about provincial distinctions that you do need to know about. Um, and then I want to talk about the UIFTER for you. I want to talk about limitations on trading. I want to talk about labor management. And then, quite frankly, we will have an other section where you're very free to ask questions. And as much as I can answer them, I will certainly answer them. Yako Hutton, to you, thank you so much for inviting me to, in fact, address this group. And I'm honored. So thank you. Yako, I don't know if you want to kick off and say why we're here.
Hi, Heather. Yes, I think there's much confusion and maybe even fear, especially retailers during this lockdown. And I think some clarity is just required. A lot of what's come from government is confusing and not always very clear. So I think just a broader picture on what we can expect and maybe even post lockdown, what we can expect as small to medium enterprises is what I mean is currently required.
All right. Excellent, excellent. Then can I just ask that everybody just keeps your microphones muted unless you want to ask a question or make a statement, and then only too happy to oblige. So thank you again for inviting me. My name is Ivor Blumenthal, and yeah, we've just been trying to demystify what is a very confusing situation. Let me start off by saying it's confusing not because of our government. Our government is trying to do everything they can to, in fact, scramble to help civil society on the one hand and to help businesses on the other hand. Government is left with a choice. They either make a decision, which is an economic decision, and that's to save the economy and let people die because we are saving the economy, or to save lives and let businesses, I suppose, suffer and many of them die and people lose their jobs, but in the process, save lives. If you look historically at what's happened, where governments around the world certainly have not reacted to flu, to COVID before, to any kind of this coronavirus situation before. Literally millions of people around the world have died. And this is almost on an annual basis, for one reason or another. And governments are saying we have to try and do something different. We can't allow millions of people to die. So this is them putting a stake in the ground and saying we have to try something different. Um, Now, what government's saying is we have to factor the economy back into the equation because we don't have enough money to continue to support people and businesses and civil society unless we have tax coming in. It's really that simple. It's an art, not a science. And that's why I say to you, ladies and gentlemen, please do not blame government for this. But you can blame government for how they're rolling out their own schemes. For example, the UIF, which is doing a terrible job, the Department of Tourism, the Department of Small Business, that are absolutely inept and just do not have skills to do what they say they're going to do or what they're paid to do. There you can blame government. Okay, so why are we here? We're here principally to discuss the fact that this document, which was released, and in fact only yesterday was asked for feedback on. This document that was released and only yesterday was asked for feedback on is a document saying that we are establishing 5 levels of classification of the country and then of the provinces, of the country and then of the provinces. 5 levels of classification. And in the process, certain industries will be allowed back to work. Now, as you know, you would have been allowed in a very narrowly described place, you would have been allowed to go back to work previously during the month of April under this section here, which is wholesale and retail trade, where you were supplying products to essential services. So, essential service product to essential service businesses. That's where you were previously under a level 5 classification. Your DIY depots, your I don't know what you call it, but your customization area where you might cut up wood, you might cut up metal as well, could be regarded as a manufacturing. There could be a manufacturing element regarded. However, you would be coming in specifically under wholesale and retail trade. So that's where you were previously. Now, under a level 4, that entire set of activities is being complemented, number one, by the definition of manufacturing from what it was previously, manufacturing of retail product to be sold under level 4, and all input products permitted scaling up to full employment, manufacturing of paper and paper products, manufacturing of packaging, petroleum, manufacture of winter clothing, automotive manufacturing, stationery production, cement and other construction materials, and hardware, scaling up in phases to 50% of employment. Now, that immediately tells you that there is a restriction on the number of people you have in your branches to 50% of employment for the construction material and hardware side of your business. I'm going to say that again. There is a limit on 50% employment. And in fact, I'm going to put it in here, a limit on 50% employment under level 4. All right, for your kinds of businesses. So that's critically important to be emphasizing. Um, and then all other manufacturing scaling up to 20% of employment. Now, this means that other manufacturing entities that might very well come to you for a product, for what they would regard as their supply chain product, um, uh, 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 20% of their businesses, they are entitled and allowed to reestablish and would be able to come to you for the supply of that product. But essentially, your first guideline is, as business owners or business managers, that you are restricted to employing 50% of the people within your organization. You're not really affected by D, which is construction and related services, because where construction is concerned in terms of construction materials and hardware, you're covered under point 8 of C, which is manufacturing. When it comes to wholesale and retail, when it comes to wholesale and retail, you can see here. Let's look for you. It's not food, not hot cook, not toilet paper, hand sanitizer, no products, no personal toiletries. Hardware components and supplies required by qualified tradespeople would also be covered by you. So you would also be covered under E10, E10. And you might be able to make an argument, and it's art, not a science, but you might be able to make an argument until challenged that the reason you're employing more than 50% people, but you are doing this on risk. And Yako, I am going to have to make this again and again and again to you as an emphasis. You're doing this on risk if you do this, but you are able to say that whereas under manufacturing we were restricted to 50% of our employment, the balance or some of the balance of that 50% we are taking up under E11, which is hardware components and supplies required by entities engaged in the provision of essential services for projects related to the provision of water, electricity, and other essential services. But you are taking a risk if you increase from that 50% by using this as a justification. In terms of vehicle repair, some of you do sell vehicle parts or vehicle spares or things relating to the vehicle industry. So there's a justification for you too there. You also do sell chemicals, packaging, and ancillary products used in the production of chemical products. You don't do anything with textiles. Um, yeah. So that's where you would also be able to get some space from, or some justification from, which is wholesale and retail. And then really you aren't affected by any of the others except maybe transport and storage. Um, if you are moving goods between provinces, in other words, if you continue to supply the electrical, the water, the essential service sectors under level 5, and you're finding that you're having to move goods from the ports of entry across provincial lines, you could essentially then claim that under J5, you are essential imported goods prioritized through ports of entry and for transport and handling to final users. No directions yet have come out about this. There might be more specific directions in that regard. But to transport your product through your supply chain across provincial lines, you could be depending on J5 almost exclusively. Um, okay, you can also come under L2 and even L3 if you really needed to, repair and related emergency services. Um, and then in terms of supply chain. So there are multiple areas that would cover you here that will allow you then to justify why you're open for business under the level 4 guidelines. But I do want to just very quickly, and by the way, you just please unmute your microphone if you want to ask a question, or you can put it into the chat feature as well. I'm only too happy to take your questions. But what I do want to focus on is this, ladies and gentlemen, this issue of provincial distinction. What you have to understand about provincial distinction is this, that up until now, we have been classified on a national basis as level 4 as level 4 as a country. So we're under level 4 restrictions, criteria, and requirements. The reality is that by the end of this week, or rather before the 1st of May, I imagine, we will also have provincial classifications and maybe even city classifications. Those of you who on Saturday were watching Nkosazana Zuma and her speech will know that she showed you a map of South Africa that had different colors on it, and she spoke about the red areas, which was essentially Johannesburg, Durban, Cape Town, and I think Port Elizabeth as well. But essentially, the major urban cities that are red level 5 areas. Now, what is likely to happen is this, that, well, we already know that KZN, the premier of KZN, has said in KZN, we are the ground zero of this problem, and therefore we are going to remain on a level 5 classification, which means, Jaco, that your stores outside of the level 5 exceptions that you're providing product to essential services, your stores in those areas that are declaring themselves to be level 5 provinces or level 5 cities, and we don't know those yet, they're still to come, if they're going to come at all. Many of the provinces might still say, well, we're not going to declare ourselves, we're not going to give ourselves an alert level, we are simply going to go with a national level of level 4. But as we know, Zikalala has come out from KZN and said, we are going to declare KZN as a level 5. There's been no gazette in that regard. I think that the ministers in the national in the War Council are trying to get KZN to come down to a level 4, only because it would be severely impactful on the businesses in KZN. But what the premier is saying is we don't want to take a health risk in favor of the economy. I think what he's also saying is that the national government will keep supporting us, and the national government is saying we're going to run out of resources to keep supporting you if we're having to do it at a level 5. So you have to be aware of provincial distinctions. This dust will be settled by midweek next week, and we'll know whether the whole country is level 4 or areas in the country remain at level 5, or even cities in some provinces remain at level 5. Now, that has an impact, because if there is a MICA or an LRB operation in any of those level 5 areas, you're restricted to the way you were trading in the month of April. You're restricted to applying essential goods to essential services, but not being able to open under E or any of the other categories under a level 4 of that risk adjusted strategy. So I want to just look at your questions now. Let me have a look at your questions, and thank you all for your questions. Yako says, as hardware stores, do we fall under manufacturing or retail? Well, Yako, you fall under the manufacturing components of what I discussed with you in terms of your being cement or other construction material and hardware, scaling up in phases to 50% of employment. And I need to talk about that scaling up in phase requirement in a little while. And then all other manufacturing scaling up to 20% employment. So that's where you would get your lead from under manufacturing. There's nothing really under construction specific. And then you would get your, well, it would come under critical it would come under 5 of D, which is critical maintenance and repair, where you would also get your license to open from in a level 4 environment. And then, of course, the hardware component, which is 10 and 11, 10 and 11 of E, which is wholesale and retail trade. So that's essentially where you would get the majority of your licenses, maybe some of it from J, which is transport, storage, and communication, maybe some of it as well from mining, repair, and related emergency services and supply chain. So those are the areas you're absolutely allowed to open for business under a level 4, in answer to your question, as hardware stores, Yako. If, however, it's a hardware store in a level 5 area like KZN are saying they want to be. Now, we anticipate that if provinces are being true to the risk-adjusted strategy, then Gauteng, KZN, and the Western Cape will declare themselves to be level 5s. But there's major engagement going on at government level because government doesn't want that to happen, because it'll put a major drain on the fiscus. But if it does happen, then either one or all 3 of those areas, if they declare themselves to be level 5, you'll be back to where you've been in April, which is essentially only then under wholesale and retail being able to trade under E11, which is hardware components and supplies required by an entity engaged in the provision of essential services. So either you're in a level 5 area, which says you only trade under E11, or you're in a level 4 area, and therefore you have a license under a whole lot of these components of the risk-adjusted strategy. Hope I've answered your question, Yako. Okay, so Andy says, could selling of gas fall under energy essential services? It could fall under food production, energy. You can sell gas essentially as a level 4, or in fact, even as a level 5. Andy, you'll be prepared. You'll be allowed to sell gas because you're at least going to be the provider of essential goods to an essential service business under a level 5. But under a level 4, you absolutely are allowed to sell gas. No question about that. Greg says, how do you justify hardware stores fall under manufacturing? Please clarify this. It's the supply of manufacturing products. So again, Greg, I'm going to read to you. Cement and other construction material and hardware into the manufacturing sector. Cement and other construction material and hardware into the so you are putting manufacturing businesses in a position to be able to manufacture. And 8 covers that, 9 covers that. If there's stuff that you sell into the automotive repair business, 6 will cover that. You might sell some stuff into the packaging, glass, bottling, container kind of business, that would be covered. And then, of course, 1, manufacturing of retail products permitted to be sold under level 4. So it's the supply under manufacturing of products that manufacturers need. It's the supply of critical maintenance and repair product under D5 that the construction sector would need. But where you're completely correct, Greg, is you fall under 10 and 11 and the other components of E. You are principally an E type of business. That's strange, but you're principally an E type of business in answer to your question, sir. And I'm going to say again to you, Greg, it's an art, not a science, unfortunately. All right, so Stephen, I think I've answered that question. Roger, we've been selling, Roger's mentioning gas. Where can we get that PDF document, Rob? I'll send it to Yako and he can distribute it to you. Or alternatively, Yako, if there's a WhatsApp group you guys are on, you can invite me to it. I can post all of these documents onto that WhatsApp group for you. I will also, by the way, be able to send you the recording of this presentation so that you can go to it and you can see it in your own time. Will we be allowed to only sell to businesses with permits? Okay, Hugo, very good question. If you are a business operating in a level 5 area, then you can only sell to businesses with permits. If you're operating in the level 4 area, then at this stage, those businesses don't need permits because in fact there has been no requirement that to open in a level 4 you need to get certificates. That could very well change. We saw that under level 5, where eventually BizPortal came online, and so essential service businesses had to apply to BizPortal, which was part of the CIPC. No such requirement has yet been set, but like I say, it's early days. We aren't at the 1st of May yet. None of the gazettes, which in fact are required to drive this whole thing, have in fact yet been published, although we anticipate that today a whole raft of those gazettes will in fact be published. So, Hugo, I'm sorry but it's as clear as mud, if I can put it to you that way. At this moment in time, you don't have to only sell as a level 4 area. You don't only have to sell to companies with certificates, but we do not know down the line what additional criteria are going to be set for us. Ziad says, do we still need permission from our local municipality to trade? Not under level 4, but under level 5. So, Ziad, if you were, for argument's sake, in the Western Cape and Western Cape decided to remain at level 5, then you would still need it. It would be business as usual in that particular regard. Brad says we don't manufacture cement. Sorry, I'm just going back there. Don't manufacture cement. We buy from, yes, of course. You buy it from the cement manufacturers and you make it available. And that's essentially under the manufacturing where the hardware comes into it and the material comes into it. Cement, other construction material, and hardware. So, yes, C relates to the manufacturing of that product. E relates to the hardwaring of that product into the sector. But the reality is, if you sell raw materials for that production and manufacturing process, then you can fall back on C as much as you can on E. So absolutely. But yes, to put your minds at ease, if you rely on E10 and E11, then everything else that you sell falls under E10. It falls under E11. You're quite comfortably covered. Except remember that 10 and 11 only relate to essential services. But so you are completely covered. You're covered by D, and you're covered by E, and you're covered by all of the others that we spoke about. Okay. Roger says selling cement to brick. Yeah, he's got it. Okay. Nareen says we're getting into winter. Well, very interesting here. If a mica store sells anything to do with heating, air conditioning, anything to do with keeping premises warm, fixing machinery to keep premises warm, then you're also covered under all of those other aspects in wholesale and retail, which is to do with the winter heaters under 15, E15, and importantly, by implication, the supply of components and products which are required for the servicing of all of those equipments. My answer to you is you're able to trade business as is from the 1st of May as a hardware store. Animal food, it's got expiry dates. Okay, I wasn't aware that you guys sell animal food. If you do sell animal food, then that's great, because there is provision then for the supply of that kind of product, both to the both on a food basis for animals, as well as from a supply basis to vets who might buy from you if they don't buy from their own suppliers. James, do we need permission from our respective municipalities to sell gas under level 5? Well, if you did in the month of April, then you're going to need that same permission in the month of May, because that's got nothing to do with COVID. That's got to do with a health and safety requirement, the way I understand it, James. Andrew says we've got many requests to sell gas to the public. You can sell gas to the public now. It has to do with heating, it has to do with heaters, it has to do with cooking and food. And so that element of wholesale and retail is now completely open under a level 4. But I must emphasize, not under a level 5 unless it's essential services. Does the buyer or the seller need to prove that the goods being purchased are essential? Only if you're in a level 5 area, Mr. Desai, not if you're in a level 4 area. Ernie says, is trade still restricted to the public for general hardware and non-disclosed items? No, it's not. You are entitled to open for purposes of the provision of any of these products to anybody who requires these products and processes. Now, I don't know, and Yako, please forgive me if I'm wrong here, but I don't know whether your organization is part of any general hardware association that it should be, that has made, by 12 o'clock yesterday, made submissions to the Department of Trade and Industry for them to come out and for them to be more specific than they are in this regulation to give you more peace of mind. Yako, only you would be able to tell me that. Sorry, can you speak up? We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
We have made a submission to government to get more clarity on certain aspects.
Okay, excellent. I do also want to refer you, ladies and gentlemen, to M, which is supply chains, which, as you can see, is um, production, manufacturing, supply, logistics, transport, delivery, critical maintenance, and repair in relation to the rendering of permitted services, including components and equipment. All workspaces of premises must have care and maintenance that is essential to to prevention of destruction, etc. And this relates to plant, machinery, inventory, etc. And the supply of essential service products continues into that supply chain sector from level 5. So you are completely able to continue to sell into that sector. Okay. Can we deliver to other provinces? If we're wholesale, and do we require a permit? Uh, Mubin, you are under level 4. Under level 4, you are going to continue to require a permit to cross provincial boundaries. Remember that under level 4, you are going to continue to require a permit to cross provincial boundaries. So that doesn't mean that because we've come down to a level 4 that that's gone away. If you look at the risk adjusted document, you'll see in the risk adjusted document, and maybe it would be worthwhile my just trying to quickly bring it up for you. I know you've all seen it, but I'm going to try and just bring it up very quickly just to be able to show you again those particular slides. Just give me 1 second, please. Bum, 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 bum. Let me move that across there. And let me just very quickly move it down here. So under level 5, there was no interprovincial movement of people except for transportation of goods and exceptional, all right, goods, and you would have to have permits for that purpose. Under level 4, there's still no interprovincial movement of people except for the transportation of goods and exceptional circumstances. So to cross the borders, you still need to have those permits. If you're delivering or if you're collecting, you still need to have those same permits. Nothing has changed from level 5. This is quite important under level 4, which is bus services, taxi services, e-hailing, private motor vehicles may operate at all times of the day with limitations on vehicle capacity, stringent hygiene requirements. As employers, it is a labor relations requirement. It's incumbent on you to make transport arrangements for your staff. It's incumbent on you to make transport arrangements for your staff, and you need to please bear that in mind to make sure that you have a heightened sense of accountability and responsibility for the transport activities of the people that are being employed in your workplace. All right, let me move on. Sorry, Lorenzo's question. If I understand what you are saying, that we are allowed to trade as a hardware store from the 1st of May, why are we specifically listed in level 3? You are allowed, Lorenzo, to be trading as a hardware store for purposes of providing goods and services to everybody else who is, in fact, either in manufacturing, who will need that product, who is in construction, who would need that product, other wholesale and retail businesses amongst your network, um, and then, of course, the transport, storage, communication, and supply chain, and repair and related services. So it is by association that you're allowed to trade as a hardware store. It is, let's say, for example, a policeman walks into your store and says, "Why are you trading?" Your answer is, "We're in the supply chain of those stores." Or a supply chain of those manufacturers, and therefore we're allowed to trade. Now it's not contested, but it's also not clearly specified. And what you've heard from Jaco is that an application for a clearer specification was made by your association to the Department of Trade and Industry that had to be in by 12 o'clock yesterday so that they could consider amending the regulations to be more specific by Wednesday, so that it's in line for the 1st of May. Jaco, can I just ask you, was that a submission that was made by Micah, or sorry, the Legendary Retail Brands, or was it a submission made by an association on your behalf?
We made two submissions, so there's no hardware association. Sorry, can you hear me firstly?
Yes, I can.
Okay. There's no hardware association essentially, so we made two submissions, one from LRB directly, and then one through SAPMA, which is a coatings association.
All right. So, by the way, Jaco, my suggestion to you is that we very, very quickly, not quickly, but that we create a hardware association as a matter of course, as a matter of urgency and priority. But we can talk about that a little later, or you and I can take that offline and talk about that. Pindila, I just want to come to you. You're saying basically we can't sell to normal consumers. We can only sell to essential providers. Well, that's not quite correct, because remember, normal consumers are entitled to be shopping for any of these products, including any parts which are related to the repair of any of these products. Normal consumers are entitled to buy anything that you sell which is related to anything that they use for heating, anything that they use for their household requirements, and they are not required to have to go through essential service providers. Under level 5, you were required to keep a list of who those individuals were who would need those parts and products. But now under level 4, at this stage, you're not required to keep a list, although for all we know, insofar as wholesale and retail is concerned, they might come out with a gazette today or tomorrow or the next day saying that you need to continue to keep those schedules. All right. So, guys, let me move on because there's a huge amount we have to discuss. So, we've discussed here the level 4 impact on your business. What I do want to say is that you have to have standard operating procedures. Jaco, can I ask you, do you have standard operating procedures for the organizations within your collection as LRB?
Specifically related to the lockdown or to level 4 regulations?
Specifically related to trading. So specifically related to trading under COVID. So for example, which deals with sanitization, which deals with social distancing, etc. And more importantly, within the LRB group, have you created some kind of a quality assurance reporting mechanism? So which means then that for argument's sake, Charles in his branch would be, let's call it the compliance LRB officer, who on a monthly basis can just sign off and say, we have implemented, we've checked that the SOP is being applied, we've got CCTV footage to prove it, etc. Here is the sanitizer we've bought. In other words, that kind of regular quality assurance mechanism. And the reason I'm addressing it here is that one branch might not be required to be as stringent as a group is required. It's incumbent on the group. So let's just say, for argument's sake, and it's not going to happen, but let's just say for argument's sake that the police force and the military decide to get a little gung-ho and they start raiding Micah's stores. And they find that there's no social distancing. They find that there's not adequate sanitization, the normal kind of thing.
Yeah. We've compiled a document for our members that should go out either today or tomorrow. And it covers everything from social distancing to how to deal with an employee that's suspected of having the disease, how to self-isolate them and transport them. So there's a comprehensive document that we've compiled, which will go out to members in the next 2 days.
I would do one more thing. And I would ask each of your branches or each of your footprints just to nominate one person who could also serve as the compliance officer for that place. So that if there is ever a request, the request will be to the compliance officer, or the request would be to LRB that would then refer back to that one single compliance officer. It's just one extra step. It's a useful step to take in a network such as yours, and it doesn't really require more than just the name of an individual and their contact details that you can then send the SOPs to, and they can then distribute in the branches. It's very important that you have a distribution network for information available, so that you can then turn around if you're ever asked the question, and you can say, here is our compliance SOP network, and these are the people responsible for that. What you could then do is just take those compliance people and run a half an hour a month webinar with them, just reminding them of the SOPs or any changes to the SOPs, any forms, or anything which might be related to gazettes. Don't make the assumption that we're not going to get more and more regulations to do with how SOPs need to be complied with, how they need to be reported on, how they need to be enforced. So rather just be proactive and put an army of people together that you know you can call on for a webinar as and when you might need to. It's just a good thing to do. The last thing under level 4 I just want to tackle with you, ladies and gentlemen, is this, that there is ordinarily, and you will have heard the president talk about it, you would have heard the Minister of Trade and Industries talk about it, but there is ordinarily a requirement that if you're opening a workplace for the first time, that essentially the first stage of opening will be just a very skeleton staff that's responsible for cleaning the workplace, sanitizing the workplace, putting, let's call it sprays in place, etc., etc., etc. The next stage then would be the stage of allowing 33% of the workforce back and making sure that they are following the rules and they've been inducted into the SOPs, and then another 33%, and then another 33%. What you want to do is you want to spread that out over a maximum, at this stage, over a maximum of 2 weeks, if not a maximum of a week, so that within a week you can have 100% of your workforce back. However, if you're within the if there's an element of construction manufacturing to your business, and I'm not saying there is, but if there's an element of construction manufacturing to your business, so for example, you might assemble or part assemble something, or you might cut something for the construction sector, then you immediately fall within that 50% provision that says you cannot have more than 50% of the people who ordinarily would work for you working for you in that division or in that organization as a whole. So you need to be aware of that. Now, that's what at the moment the regulations say. They're verbal regulations on the 33%, 33%, 33%. They're written regulations on the manufacturing and the construction sector. So that's at the moment as much as we have by way of regulations. There is definitely going to be a clarification gazette and regulation talking with that 33%, 33%, 33% phasing in of people into the workplace, and a business under a certain number of people will most probably be excluded from that. But we can't talk about that yet because we have no regulations whatsoever in that regard yet. So um, at this moment in time, there is no gazette yet on any changes, and I'm talking here to Noreen Dyer. There is no gazette yet on any changes at this moment in time to trading times, except to say that you cannot be open after 8 o'clock at night, and you cannot be open before 5 o'clock in the morning, which is the curfew which will apply to a level 4 lockdown. Because remember, we're still virtually in lockdown. So the curfew that will apply to level 4 lockdown is 8 in the evening, 5 in the morning is a curfew that will apply. At this moment in time, there is no regulation dealing with working hours. There have been applications made to the DTI and other government departments. There have been applications made to them to try and limit working hours to one shift because of the financial implications of more than one shift in some industries, but there's been no reaction yet. And as you can imagine, there are hundreds of industries applying. So DTI have to run around doing all of these things. So you're going to have to just give them time to deal with working hours and trading hours, if that. All right. So I want to move now on to temporary employment relief. from the unemployment insurance fund. So um, if you are, oh, sorry, I just want to go to Willem's question again. Will we be allowed to do deliveries? Willem, you will be allowed to do deliveries. In fact, doing deliveries is preferential to you serving as a collection point. So you will be able to do deliveries. If you're under level 5 province, then those deliveries will have to be to essential service businesses. If you're under a level 4 province, then they can be to consumers as well as essential service businesses, as long as the product of the delivery relates to an item on the on the risk adjusted strategy. Um, Del Marie says, so can we then supply paint as a hardware store from the 1st of May? You can supply essential service paint as a hardware store from the 1st of May, and then you can supply paint into any of the supply chain requiring downstream sectors that you read in that level 4 set of industries that have been released, and that might be adjusted by the 1st of May. Delmarie, I'm not going to give you the answer that you want me to give you, which is can we sell paint and deliver paint to Ivor Blumenthal in his house? I make an argument that within this regulation, it very definitely says for critical repairs, etc., I will be able to do that as a private consumer, but it doesn't specifically say that. So, Delmarie, I'm not going to say to you, you can do that unless you can prove that Ivor Blumenthal somehow is one of the authorized businesses or individuals under E or under any of the others, D or C, um, or even B, which is electricity, gas, and water, that is going to need what I'm supplying them. I would love to say to you, absolutely, but it's not clear yet. We're waiting for more clarification. If more clarification doesn't come, then basically my answer to you would be for the same purpose as level 5, as it's been extended by 17 to 20 of category E, which is on your screen as we speak. I'm sorry I cannot be more specific. Waterproofing, Zafrula. As far as I'm concerned, waterproofing does justify as an essential service product. However, when it comes to who you sell to, it would need to be to a waterproofing company because that is absolutely not in any of the level 4 regulations or requirements. Regulations or requirements. Remember this: it's the same thing as food. I've been allowed to go to Pick and Pay to buy essential food to live on. I am allowed to go to a hardware store to buy essential product to keep my home intact. A waterproofing product, therefore, is an essential service product if I've got a leak in my roof. If I'm challenged, I simply have to have photographs to show I've got a leak in my roof. If Micah says to me, I have to fill in a schedule, I'll fill in the schedule and say I'm buying waterproofing product because I have an essential service need at my home and I want to self repair. I don't want to have to get someone to come in and do it for myself. So, Delmarie, in a roundabout way, I think I've answered your question. And the same goes the for tools. Remember, it's an art, not a science. It's how you tiptoe through the daisies, essentially, I'm sorry to say. All right, so TER. Jaco, do you want me to talk about TER? Because you might say to me, all of us were open as essential service hardware stores. And we haven't dipped into TER. Do you want me to talk about TER and give you an update?
Yes, please, Ivor. And I think there might be a number of questions on it as well.
Of course.
So if our members want to pose questions while we're on TER as well, especially now that we're allowed to trade for a period with a relaxation and going into stage 4, I think that makes or gives us quite a few complexities in how to manage staff remuneration and UIF.
So it gives you an absolute complexity. So it gives you an absolute complexity. And that is this. Your complexity is this. TER only relates to the non-essential service side of a business that is shut down and in complete lockdown. TER benefit will only be attracted by individuals who have been temporarily laid off from a business. So if you have one foot in essential services and one foot not in essential services, TER will only apply to the foot not in essential services. You are allowed to apply for TER on behalf of some of your employees who are truly laid off, but you are not allowed to apply for TER on behalf of those employees who are back at work or maybe never left work, But maybe even those people who are on half day, not full day, that is not going to be covered by TER, which means the company won't apply to the UIF for those people who are on half day, um, to supplement that half day loss. However, remember what UIF is. UIF is an insurance policy, and you do pay UIF on behalf of all of your staff members. And they therefore have individual insurance from the UIF, which means that if they are one of those people who is back at work, but only working half day and therefore having to take 50% salary reduction, those people will, in their own right, be able to go to the Department of Labor, the UIF division, and make an application in their own right for the part of their package which has been reduced. So instead of me getting 10,000, I'm now only getting 5,000. I'm going to go to the UIF myself. I'm going to make application to the UIF. My company will give me a letter to say my hours have been reduced. And the UIF will then apply a scale which says at the lower level, 60% of that 5,000 Rand that's missing, and up to 38% at the highest level of that 5,000 Rand that's missing is what I can claim back from UIF. But I'll do that in my own right. So again, I'm saying you can, as a company, have part of your business in lockdown and part of it as essential services still trading. There's no problem with that. Um, Now, as far as TER is concerned, it unfortunately has been completely messed up by the Minister of Labour. And he admitted, he went on TV and said, we don't have the competency or the capacity to manage TER. Um, but essentially, it's been completely messed up by the Minister of Labour. So companies are being rejected, they're being declined for the wrong reasons. They are declining, for example, a staff member who is a foreigner but has a work permit and on whose behalf you pay UIF that they're not allowed to decline, but they are declining. They're also, their formula for calculating what you should get back is not being respected. So they're not even respecting their own regulation, but they're coming out with a whole lot of supplementary internal rules. And so you're very often finding that you will get payment back, but it's nowhere close to what you thought you were going to get based on what they originally indicated they would pay. So there is a whole lot of mess as far as UIFTR is concerned. Their help center doesn't work. Their online system doesn't always work. Um, and one can put it down to the fact that COVID has simply been foisted on us, and they've had a week or 2 weeks to sort this whole mess out. But the reality is it's not working properly. Now, the problem is this, and I do need to emphasize this to you. If you are in lockdown, or part of you is on lockdown, and so an employee has been laid off, you have to adopt a policy which is a no work, no pay policy. So, as far as payroll is concerned, you're not paying the person for not working. That's the only way UIFTR kicks in, is if the person is not being paid by the business. What you are entitled to do, supplementary to payroll, is you are allowed to allow the employee to encash their leave and pay them out that encashment, not through payroll. Because remember, it's not through payroll that you're paying them their leave out. It is their entitlement. It's money you're holding in trust. And then what you're entitled to do is you're entitled to pass the UIFTR money onto them when you get it. If you've been a good employer and a good employer says, I'm not waiting for the UIF to come right, my staff depend on this money to survive. So I'm going to pay them, and then I'm going to wait for the UIFTR money, and I'm going to set it off against what I've paid them. I'm saying to you, whatever you're going to pay them, it could be the full amount of their salary, but you're not going to pay them through payroll. You need to understand this. Payroll needs to show that there were no payments at the end of April, there were no payments at the end of May, there were no payments at the end of June. If lockdowns continue as level 4 or even level 5 until those times, all right? Because if payroll does show that you've paid them, the amount you've paid them will come off of the calculation before TER kicks in. So you please need to understand that. If you're going to be good to your staff and you're still going to pay them and then set it off against TER and set it off against the leave that's due to them, you're not going to do it through payroll. You're going to do it as a bonus or an ex gratia payment to your staff, but you're not going to do it as payroll. And you're not going to declare it to the UIF when they say, what was their salary at the end of April? It's going to be zero. I'm sorry to sound so dogmatic, but I hope you understand what I'm saying, ladies and gentlemen. Stephen says, with regard to TER, If there are staff who are compromised, over age, ill, etc., and therefore not allowed to be back at work, could they be defined as lockdown individuals, and can we claim for them? If that part of your business that they work in is locked down, and therefore they are temporarily laid off, then you can claim for them. If, however, they are vulnerable or they're sick, then they, in their own right, are entitled to claim from the UIF, because that's the third UIF insurance policy that would then cover them. But you don't claim for them. They would claim for themselves. But they would essentially be laid off because they're in the vulnerable category. Now, there, you're entitled to say to them, we'll pay you out the sick leave which is due to you, if it qualifies. In other words, if a doctor has said that they've tested positive or we want them to go into quarantine, then you're entitled to pay them out from sick leave, but not TER. Having said that, you can try and claim they're in lockdown. If you've already claimed for them in April, let's say, on TER, you can continue to claim for them because they're in a vulnerable category. At this moment in time, that's not an explanation that the UIFTR accept. However, there's absolutely nothing to say that they won't adjust their criteria and allow that to also be covered by TER. But as things stand at the moment, you're going to have to talk about sick leave, unpaid leave, or maybe normal leave. But please, it has to be a principle of no work, no pay, because otherwise you're invalidating your ability to claim TER or any kind of pay on behalf of those people. Greg says, when you pay the TERS amount, does this incur the UIF, PAYE deduction, or is it the net and gross? It's the net and gross at this stage. I think they're going to come out with a supplementary regulation in that regard. But at this stage, and remember, it's not going through payroll. Remember, it's not going through payroll. It's a supplementary account that's going through. Okay. So that's UIFTR. I do want to remind you, UIFTR was created only for periods of the lockdown. Remember that we've gone from a level 5 to a level 4, but there are many, many businesses, for example, restaurants, that are still in lockdown. The TER provision has been made for April, May, and June. If we don't get to level 3 or level 2 by the end of June, then the TER provision will be extended. We've had the president saying it will be extended for as long as it needs to be extended, so that people have something to live on, even if it's not their total, income. Greg says we were told that TERS must reflect on the payslip. The refund of TERS will reflect on the payslip. We got this money in from TERS and we paid it out to an individual, but not the upfront payment that you want to set off against TERS, Greg. I think that's critically important to distinguish. Okay. All right. So that's UIF TERS. But like I say, it is a real mess at this moment in time. Any of you who've tried to upload the CSV files, you know you will have had problems. So, you unfortunately, there is a major, I just think it's a block. They don't have enough people. They don't have the competency or the capacity to manage. And they've asked SARS now for SARS to help them manage the TER system. There is an online survey I will want you, ladies and gentlemen, to participate in. Those of you who've been involved in applying for TERS, it's an evaluation of the entire system, including, by the way, what's working and what's not working. It's evaluation as well of your opinion of the entire system, because of the fact that there is a parliamentary portfolio committee on the TER system that is meeting urgently in a couple of days' time, and they've asked civil society for input into what's working and what's not working. So I'm going to ask you or your accountants, please, to go to that link and fill in that form, just so that we have the kind of information which will be required to be able to give the kind of input as and when it's going to be used in Parliament to let's say, improve on the TER system. All right. Any questions about TER before I move on? You can ask them verbally if you want.
If we don't get, sorry, it's Greg.
Yes, Greg.
Yeah, if we don't, our TERS has been, I don't want to say rejected. We got 9 out of the 110 approved. The other 101 employees, they said, are not registered with us. And when we contacted UIF, they said that we would have to do a new application for, or like a declaration with the UIF, and they say that department's closed. So, from my understanding, they're not going to be able to assist us with TERS. What do we do then with the employees? Do we just notify them to say that unfortunately we are not going to get assistance from TERS, so we can pay what we can up to a point, and then we just stop paying them?
So my answer to you is this. My answer to you is, first of all, there is a mechanism on their own system that you should be utilizing. Number one, to be able to email them, to call their call center. There is no such thing as you not being able to rectify a problem which pre-exists, even if it's through your own mistake. There are people available, by the way, who can assist and can help you, and I can put you in touch with those people who are doing it all the time for clients of mine as well. So there's no question about that, that you can rectify. There's absolutely no such thing. Even if you have not loaded the people, there is a mechanism online to load the people. You don't have to do it with people who are working at the UIF office. And remember what the original TER regulation said. It said that if even if you hadn't paid UIF on behalf of the person, but you were prepared to sign an MOU or an IOU, sorry, through the MOA, they would accept that. So all of these things can be changed. You just need people who know how to change them. So please, if you want to, you can message me, and I'm very happy to put you in touch with people I know and trust can actually make things work for you.
Yeah, that would be great if we could get that, because I've tried the online, and when you do the online process, it told us that the UIF and PAYE number belongs to a different employer, so we can't register under that name. So it's
So
but that's a unique one for us.
Greg, I've got people who can normalize that for you or regularize that for you. So just message me or WhatsApp me. My WhatsApp number is 082 880 5316. I'm just putting that in the chat now. So, please feel free to WhatsApp me, and I'm only too happy to put you in touch with someone who I know has done it for at least six of my clients now, big companies and small. So good. That's my WhatsApp number. All right. So moving on. Sorry, I just want to see what other people here say. Anva says, we are thinking of paying annual leave to our staff. No, you must. Sorry, Anva. Thank you for that question. So here's the thing. This is your messaging to your staff. Dear staff member, you are in lockdown. Because you are in lockdown, it's a no work, no pay scenario. We are going to apply for UIFTR to pay you something, and that something could be anything from 60% at the lower levels of the salaries up to 38% of the higher levels of the salaries, up to a maximum of 17,720 Rand. And also, please note there will be a gap between what TERS pays out and what your salary is. The only way of addressing that gap, because it's no work, no pay in the business, the only way of addressing it is if you apply now for us to encash all of the leave that is due to you, the ordinary leave that is due to you. We will allow you to encash it up to a maximum of what the TERS will be and the balance, so that we don't exceed the salary, your average monthly salary, because that's a TERS requirement. If you've got leave left over, we'll carry it forward into May, because we're extending the lockdown for some people until May and even June. However, you have a choice. You don't need to encash your leave if you don't want to, in which case the only amount that will be paid out to you when we receive it will be the TERS amount. You have to have that discussion with your staff, Enver, and you have to have that now. So my answer to you is you have to cash in on, and you have to give them an opportunity of cashing in on annual leave. And that has to be now, supplementing the TER. But it's how you do it, and it's in which sequence you do it, that's critically important to you, not invalidating your UIFTR claim. I do also need to say to you, ladies and gentlemen, please, this is critically important. Today is the 28th. You've got the 28th, the 29th, and the 30th. You've got the 28th, the 29th, and the 30th. This thing finishes on the 30th. UIF-TER applications, for the moment, UIF-TER applications stop on the 30th. You need to know that. And my point to you is this. Even if you don't have all of the forms and all of the documents and everything you need in place, even if you don't have those things, get your foot in the door with the UIF-TER, put in the application, and then let them decline. It's fine if you let them decline because the application is in. But don't go forward without putting in that application for UIF-TER. All right. Good. Thank you for that. All right. I know I started off by saying we're a level 4 and you can trade, but look at your business and make a delineation, do a financial calculation on who you don't need in the business because there's an area of your business which might not be allowed to open, and confirm with your staff before the 30th that you're going into May remaining locked down in that part of your business, if there's a part of your business. On the other hand, anybody who's back at the work on the 4th of May, on the 1st of May, anybody who's back at work, you invalidate the lockdown, you invalidate UIF-TER for that individual. So be very clear that when you ask someone to come back to work, it's in the knowledge that you will no longer qualify for UIF-TER for that person. And at the very most, that person would have to go to the UIF themselves and apply, should you be putting them on short time, for the difference between what you're paying them and what you ordinarily might pay them. All right, so please understand that. You need to have a picture in front of you of what the limitations on your trading and the effect on your staff members is going to be because of your decision making here. Okay. As far as labor management is concerned, please understand your messaging to your staff is absolutely critical. Dear staff member, this is a situation. So it's absolutely clear and there's nothing about it that is misunderstood. Performance management principles. Now, this is tricky. It is an unfair labor practice for you to dismiss, for you to retrench, or for you to take any disciplinary action whatsoever against any individual during the period of a lockdown. Now, what that means is, if on the 26th you started a disciplinary inquiry and the chairperson said, I want to postpone my decision until the 27th or the 28th, 29th, 30th, the fact that on the 27th we were put into lockdown means that it stayed the chairperson of that inquiry's opportunity to deliver their finding until after lockdown is lifted or until the business is trading again. So you need to understand that going into a lockdown where you weren't an essential service, this doesn't apply to essential services, where you weren't an essential service. The effect of that directive by the president was you are no longer allowed to manage performance, essentially, because there's no one whose performance you need to be managing here. So you're no longer allowed to apply performance management. That's either the management of the person in terms of the job description, your performance appraisals of them, your feedback to them, or in terms of the counseling of their competence or of their behavior, or in terms of the discipline of their competence or their behavior. All of that is stayed. Now, what that also means is, and I can't understand why there's so many companies doing this, but what that also means is that if you had an ongoing Section 189 process, which was going on before the lockdown, where you had warned staff that we're needing to cut back on staff and expenses and overheads, so we're going to look at everything, but it might result in retrenchment, might result in you going half day, it might result in us combining jobs, etc., etc. The moment the lockdown is declared, all of that is stayed. The Section 189 process cannot continue. However, the moment you reopen and go back to work, it can continue. So if you're going to open up for the people who are coming back to work on the 1st of May, if you had a pre-existing Section 189 process in place, it can continue after the 1st of May. But it cannot have been affected during the month of lockdown, which was April. Please, ladies and gentlemen, you do have to understand that. Any questions in that regard? Because I know there's massive confusion. But that is not clear as mud. That is absolutely clear and understandable. Any questions about that? Roger says demotions. You cannot demote while a person is temporarily laid off, and you cannot demote them as a result of the layoff. You cannot say that before we laid off, I had no problem, but now I'm having to demote you because of the layoff. You have to reinitiate your Section 189 process when you're trading again. Critically important. Anva says, can we start a retrenchment process after lockdown? Of course you can. Absolutely. And Anva, you can do it because of the lockdown. You can say, we were just holding our heads above water before the lockdown. Lockdown has caused us to make major losses we cannot absorb, and therefore we're needing to cut our costs. Of course you can. But that means you're not retrenching. You're initiating a Section 189 process that might result in retrenchment, Anva. There's no time period to that. So you can do it over a 1 week or a 2 week or a 3 week or a month period. But the language is we're initiating a Section 189 period because a process because of COVID, which might result in retrenchments. Roger says, can we do salary cuts? You can't do salary cuts during the month of lockdown because it's no work, no pay. You're not paying them anything. Can we implement salary cuts after lockdown has been lifted and we're trading again? Absolutely. But you have to go through the Section 189 process, because remember, salary cuts are as a result of the engagement which is directed through the 189 process. Jaco, I actually think that it might be very useful. Sorry, I'm putting words into your mouth, but it might be very useful for us to run a webinar on how to performance manage, continue with the Section 189 processes, initiate the Section 189 processes, and how to get to the period, or rather how to get to the point of initiating retrenchments as well as a second webinar. You might want to think about that, and I'm only too happy to do that for you if you wanted, Jaco. Okay. So that's Roger on salary cuts. Right. 35% of basic salary and plus hours worked to be paid. If the person is back at work, Roger, you're entitled to say to a guy, look, now this is very important, ladies and gentlemen, so please bear this in mind as a term. There is a recovery period which is implied once lockdown is lifted for any business. In other words, if I've been locked down for the month of April, now suddenly I'm opening, my customers aren't going to rush back to me. My turnover is not going to be what it was in January or even in November, December last year. So I can assume that everything, even including the lease that I'm paying to my landlord, will be staggered over a minimum of 3 months, but the average is between 6 and 12 months, will be staggered. So for example, if it's a lease, I'll start off by paying 25% of my lease for May. Then I'll pay 50% of my lease for June, and maybe 75% for July. And only in August, I'll be back to paying 100% of my lease to my landlord. In fact, you're finding the majority of businesses now negotiating with their landlords on a percentage of turnover clause because of wanting to share the risk of business either returning or not returning in at least the next 6 months to a year. Now, it's the same principle that you can apply to your staff. We don't know how busy we're going to be. So at this stage, we're saying to you, we want you back for 35% of the hours you ordinarily would have worked for us. We're going to pay you 35% of your salary, and at the same time, we know we can't expect more than 35% of the work from you. 50% would obviously be more reasonable. So instead of employing you for 8 hours, we're going to employ you for 4 hours a day, and we're going to reduce your salary by 50%. We've got no choice. That's how we're recovering from the lockdown. If they say no, then you say, fine, then the alternative is retrenchment, unfortunately. All right. So how you manage that is obviously up to negotiation. But I think it's absolutely critical that you do that, and you understand you can do that. But it's how you manage it that's absolutely critical, ladies and gentlemen. Jaco, I think it could be very useful running a workshop in that regard. I don't know if you agree or disagree, but we can talk about that down the line. All right. Good. So, ladies and gentlemen, I know we started this at 11. I also know you've got other things to go to. That's why we moved it to 11. In fact, I think we've actually gone over the time, so I do apologize for that. Let me just ask, are there any other questions? Oh, sorry. Anva says, please kindly respond to my question 2 above before you go. question 2. Sorry, I'm just looking for it, Anver. It slipped my mind. Our TERS claim was short paid. How does UIF pay? Do they pay in batches or in one lump sum? No. So, Anver, if UIF say they're going to pay you TERS, they will pay you 35 days of the person's salary. Because remember that UIF claim was for the 35 days of lockdown. If you remain in an industry that remains locked down, then the next payment will be subject to that extension. So they're going to pay you for 35 days. That's critically important, Anver, for you to understand. So if it was short paid, you're entitled to go online and see why it was short paid and how they calculated. You're entitled to send them an email. You're entitled to phone them. I would say to you, it might be useful using someone like Carol, who I want to recommend to you to actually get her to get the answers for you because she knows how to. But you definitely want to find out. But they should have sent you a letter to say where they short paid and what the formula was that they used. But you are entitled to challenge it. You say you have received a recon with no attachments. You simply email them and say, I want the details of the recon. How did you get to these figures? Because they've been using internal formulas that were not legal formulas. You might have seen the brochure, not the brochure, the letter that has come out from the South African Institute of Chartered Accountants that have sent a request to the Minister for information. You might have seen Weber Wenzel have lodged a legal urgent action for clarification because their clients are saying we've got no idea how the UIF made these calculations. One of the things you've got to make very clear in your messaging to your staff is that you are not responsible for what the UIF pays out, which means that whatever they pay out is what you will give to the staff member. If you've given them an advance, they must sign a document to say that if you've overcalculated what TER will be, that they will either pay you that back or it will be set off against their leave at a later stage. You've got to just cover yourself in that regard because it's an art, not a science, the way the UIF is working at this moment in time. No one really understands how they're working. Sorry to be so loose about how I'm responding to you. Where can we get the recording of this webinar? I will send it to Jaco. Jaco, if you want, you can add me to your WhatsApp group and I'll post it onto the WhatsApp group. I'll also post these other documents that I've been referring to. So thank you for that. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I know that you really are all late for that other webinar that you have to be attending, so I really apologize taking you over time. Jaco, if you're still online, anything else you want to ask or say?
Yeah, if I can just summarize, I think there's still a little bit of confusion on what we may supply and to whom. According to your assessment of level 4, it would be to any business that is operating now that requires goods or product. So any manufacturer or any other company that is operating now in the level,
or any essential service,
any essential service. And in terms of the public, you would say all essential goods, including gas, pet food.
Sorry, you said something I didn't say. That's critically important. What you would be supplying to the public are essential product, essential service listed goods. And there's a list, there's a schedule A of the original disaster regulations, which has been extended, which does list the goods that can be applied as essential goods. Thank you for that, Jaco. That's the best way of doing it until there is a response to you of the input that you've actually put into the DTI.
Okay.
Thank you.
And just thank you very much for your time, Ava. We really appreciate it. In terms of the other webinar that you mentioned, that's not for our membership. That's a private webinar. So if anybody thought there's another one post this, it's a different webinar. But thank you very much for your time and effort, and we appreciate your input into this matter.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.